I think for listeners, whether they're, regardless of their place in their journey of maybe having a education startup or just being interested, I think you have a lot of valuable lessons and experience to share. So that's a long way to say. Can you tell a little bit about your background and then also what you're up to today?
Absolutely. So my background is kind of the American dream of following your heart and looking for opportunities. So I started in education policy and public policy and plan to stay there indefinitely when I got this awesome opportunity to advise a small EdTech startup that nobody had ever heard of here in LA. A few months later, I became the first marketing hire and had absolutely no marketing experience whatsoever. All I knew was education and the education market. And so that's really what I leaned into, leading marketing for GoGuardian, which is now serving something like 1 in 4 students in the US and millions worldwide, and really just embracing this group of really collaborative, forward-thinking entrepreneurs who cared about education and wanted to make an impact. And I really fell in love with the scale and the scope that we could have an idea and affect millions of people within a week. And I loved that. And that led me into tech startups in general, and really, again, falling in love with the scope that you could have an idea and affect millions of people in a matter of days. And from that, I worked in-house for a couple of fast-growing software companies, which was a wonderful experience. But through that experience, I came across all of these other really amazing mission-driven founders who were brilliant domain experts, had incredible products. And I found myself asking over and over, this is amazing. Why is this not everywhere? Why haven't I heard of this? And over, the answer was the go-to-market strategy, that the way they had thought of distributing the product just didn't work or didn't differentiate and wasn't going to scale. And so I kind of dabbled in consulting a bit while I was still in-house at a software company, but finally came across these 3 neuroscience PhDs, all former college professors at top-tier universities, who come up with this AI algorithm that could take any textbook content and turn it into an interactive lesson. So kids could split atoms, dissect cadavers, walk on the moon. It was amazing. And again, I find myself saying, this is amazing. Why is this not everywhere? Why have I not heard of it? And the answer was just marketing, how they had thought to market and distribute the product, how they were pricing it, how they were packaging it, who they were selling it to, just didn't work. But by the time we met, they were 12 years in and they were done. And they wanted to move on to other things. So they ended up just selling the company for very little money. And to this day, you haven't heard of the product and it's nowhere. And that was such a frustrating experience to me that it was finally my push to say, okay, I need to do this full time, because the scale and the scope of the impact that you can have early on, the decisions that are being made, how you're thinking of targeting customers, all of this is so much more impactful than any of the more iterative decisions that are made later on in a company's life cycle. And so finally, I just decided that the scale and scope of that impact was so exciting, and I really wanted to be there to help guide these mission-driven, impactful founders who had these brilliant products that could change people's lives.
hmm Yeah, that's
Is this
an awesome story.
oh,
What'd you say?
I was trying to get out of a glare.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so a couple things that I'm interested in that kind of description of your journey so far. First, if you can remember, maybe you can, maybe you can't. You mentioned some policy related work, right? And then you move into, like you said, GoGuardian, which was a early stage startup at the time. Can you think about what you saw or even what you were telling yourself that made you decide to go into what, at the time would be a less certain type of role, or, there's a lot of uncertainty or some risk. So can you remember what that process was like for you?
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point, because that's exactly right. And most of the people in my life did not think that was a good decision, leaving a stable job at a reputable establishment to go into this uncertain startup land. The reason I got into education, the reason I got into education policy, was really for the scale and the scope of the impact. When I was a kid, I really cared about poverty. I was focused on poverty. And when I realized that education was the most sustainable solution to poverty, that's really where the interest came from. But I found that much of the scale and the scope of the impact that I thought would be at the education policy level takes so long for any individual to really impact. And there are so many external factors that affect the scope of the impact and really the autonomy that any one idealistic 20-something-year-old can do. And I didn't see that in startups, of that we could have an idea and it could be, and millions of students could be impacted. And the only thing stopping us was our own work ethic and ability to figure it out. And so that was really the draw of feeling like feeling like the scope of the impact that I had wanted to have was available. And so it was worth the risk, and it was worth trying things out and the experimentation of it. And I love the companies I worked for prior, loved the think tank I worked at and the public sector institutions. But really the scale and the scope of the impact was the promise of tech startups, that there's no reason you can't impact millions of people with your brain. And that was really appealing.
Mm-hmm.